Japanese culture places an incredible value on vacations. A toxic work environment and overcrowded cities mean that people really need a break, and they've mastered the art of packing everything you need to relax and unwind into a weekend trip a short drive away. Especially in the 90s, resorts were huge operations, basically entire towns dedicated to helping you chill out, and the main face behind that trend was the Fukunan Kaihatsu Corporation. Already prevalent across most of Japan, they wanted to expand to the southern island of Kyushu by building a resort town, and accomplished that with Sekia Hills. Squarely in between the bustling cities of Kumamoto and Fukuoka, the resort was mostly like any other Japanese vacation spot. A lavish hotel in the mountains with a bowling alley and golf course, surrounded by bathhouses, scenic overlooks, and arcades, all a short walk away from a shopping center. I mean, I certainly wouldn't turn down a trip to Hotel Sekia, but what it offered was all corporate and par for the course. Their main attraction, however, was the exact opposite. What they created here would influence drift culture for generations and generations to come. And if a kiss can melt a heart, show me tonight, oh baby, in the dark. Driving and Joy Club Sekia Hills opened in August 1998 and would quickly grow to become the average drifter's dream destination. Sekia wasn't just a track, it was a full complex specifically designed to cater to the grassroots driver's every need, and although the product of a megacorporation, was in no way family fun. With punishing technical corners and an incredibly unforgiving gravel trap, it was obviously designed to test the limits of drifting ability. And while slightly dangerous, the layout was super fun, taking full advantage of the area's natural elevation with huge uphill and downhill sectors and a stunning view out into the Sekia wilderness. Still, the beginner drift sessions were run in the parking lot around a more forgiving cone course, and a corner of that lot was converted last minute to a go-kart track for the little racers. This wasn't the end of it though. Towering over that same parking space was the DEC Super Factory, a full-service tuning shop, parts store, and restaurant similar to an up garage or auto box. It was essentially an entire drift-focused shopping mall, specifically built to get you on track as fast and as cheap as possible. They featured preset upgrade packages for all the popular models. You could bring in a stock S chassis, have it converted to a drift machine within an afternoon, and then test the car out for free. To showcase that program, they built 3 demo cars, a yellow S15, a red 180, and a blue 180 that barely left the parking lot. As Sekia grows and evolves, these cars will change alongside it, so stay tuned for some updates. Discounting all of this craziness, maybe the most welcome improvement Sekia made was their pit lane. Most circuits popular with drifters were originally designed as kart tracks, and usually had pits that reflected that. At best undersupplied and small, and at worst, literally just tents in the parking lot. Sekia was designed as a drift track with occasional kart events, but their pit lane resembled the setup you would see at a large racing circuit like Autopolis. It had showers, well-supplied pit boxes, and a spectator area on the roof, which created a unique tradition of dumping buckets of ice water on winners from up above. You want to know what else should become a unique tradition? Visiting vx-3000.net. We got blogs, we got a radio, and we got all sorts of other written content. The site's pretty cool, so you should probably check it out, man. Like, I don't know, you should probably check it out, man. To be honest, I question how this project was even authorized, because nothing about Sekia screams big corporation trying to capitalize off of drifting. I think most of that comes down to the incredibly smart choice Fukunan Kaihatsu made when they hired Takashi Sakai as president. Sakai was only 25 years old at the time of opening, but was already a veteran in the Kyushu drift scene. He brought 2 huge advantages to Sekia, the first being his incredibly deep connections in the community. A personal friend of absolute legend Ken Nomura, the drift school at Sekia was essentially a joint effort between Eurus and the circuit, with Nomuken dropping in to lecture and give ride-alongs when he wasn't off competing in tournaments or hosting videos. Alongside his Eurus connections, he also held influence on a more local level. His yellow S15 was well known across central and southern Japan as the star car of Team D-Side, an influential early club that he ran. Alongside a bunch of future Sekia employees, D1 driver Ryoji Takata was on the roster, and would go on to have a notable career before he tragically passed in an accident. These affiliations cemented Sakai's status as a leader in the scene, and gave the circuit a good reputation before it even opened. The second, maybe most important advantage he had was his incredible mindset. Sekia operated on two core tenets: drifting should be for everyone, and creating a lifelong love for the sport should come before making a profit. Sekia was famous for having a ton of female drifters because of this mindset. Most events had popular and incredibly competitive women's classes, long before series like D1 Ladies League were even thought possible. Keep in mind that at this point, some tracks didn't even let women drive, so Sekia was seriously unique. In the long run, their genuine passion would net them an adoring fan base, but the circuit was still in its infancy. That would all change in 1999, when a group of veteran drifters would show up to crush the circuit on the biggest car show in the country.
まだまだ寒い九州熊本県
第59回生かす走り屋チーム天国九州大会
Maybe it wasn't that serious. This new, exciting circuit was included in many a magazine news report, but more important than that was the inaugural Ikaten drift battle. A tradition dating back to the late 80s, Ikaten was a casual competition between local clubs, mostly focused on having fun. The drifters were always up to something stupid, as censored here, but the event was still a hugely important showcase of the circuit, as it was broadcast on video option and hosted by Keiichi Tsuchiya. Basically every single car person in Japan was going to be tuned into the event, and even though the competition was low stakes, public opinion on Sekia would be pretty much determined off of this single video. It makes sense then that it would be a close, hard-fought battle, right? Well, somehow the option team decided that it would be a good idea to invite Sakai and D-Side, which basically nullified the competition. He completely dominated everyone else and was only stopped in the final battle, but that didn't even matter, because the guy who beat him was another member of D-Side. While it may not have been the most hard-fought competition, it was an excellent showcase of both the difficulty of the circuit and how awesome it looked to completely crush it. With this, Sekia was squarely in the public consciousness, but still needed some time to grow. Information from this period is incredibly sparse, but just a few years later, we'll see how their efforts paid off big time. By 2001, casual weekend events were filling up with legitimately hundreds of cars and even more spectators. It was one of the hottest tracks on the scene, with something going down almost every day. All of this was captured by the Australian video magazine Hard Tuned Imports, providing some of the only English language coverage of the circuit online. They say that Sekia
always supplies the most spectacular drifts and the most spectacular stuff-ups.
Especially with this amateur crowd, it proves true. The circuit would serve you an incredibly harsh penalty for even the smallest mistakes, which meant a lot of newcomers would be heading home with a very steep bill.
Like we always say, that's the price you pay for drift.
One of those beginners was someone who'd come to be very important to the circuit in the next few years. Yuri Oguchi, nicknamed Yuririn, was an amateur drifter who drove a black S13. After a crash, she was incredibly apprehensive about attending drift school at Sekia, but her fears were quickly dismissed on the forums by Sakai. After a trip down, she returned to the forums to express her gratitude to the Sekia staff. They welded her cracked exhaust manifold for free because she was short on cash. Stories like this played out over and over again on the Sekia forums, drivers going from scared to incredibly enthusiastic because of the gentle encouragement the Sekia employees gave. Yuririn's story was a little different though, as this act of kindness caused something that spread far beyond a few forum posts. In fact, as the years go by, we'll hear back from her a ton. With an amazing reputation in the community, a well-designed circuit, and amenities like nowhere else, it was kind of a no-brainer that Sekia was already gaining a lot of attention. They were just getting started though. 2002 would put the eyes of the entire nation on Sekia Hills. If you're watching this video, you probably know what D1 GP is. The most famous drifting series in the world with the best cars, best drivers, and best tracks. Well, the crazy thing is, it wasn't always that way. Their first season in 2001 only took place on 3 different tracks, and the cars were a lot more grassroots than you would expect. Still, the event was incredibly popular, and the organizers knew that they would have to expand massively to meet demand. One area missing from the original season was Kyushu, and Sekia Hills was almost a no-brainer for the 2002 roster. At this point, drifting was still seen as a very much illegitimate and low-class form of motorsport, so a large circuit dedicated to drifting without angry locals, disapproving track officials, and overzealous police was literally a godsend to the growing series. The benefit was mutual too. D1 brought new parts manufacturers that got to see the store, and an audience bigger than anyone had ever seen at Sekia. When the event actually got started, people were crowded into every possible location someone could sit or stand, for good reason. The best drivers absolutely destroyed the track. With quicker cars, the long first corner complex could be done in a single, incredibly fast drift, and while only a few pulled it off this year, the skill on display was amazing. Just a side note, the early years of D1 were crazy. You could just show up and qualify if you were good enough, and at least at Sekia, that meant that local shops and even just amateurs who'd been running the track since it opened could compete on a high level with D1 legends. The sight of a lightly modified, totally unsponsored A6 keeping up with Nob Taniguchi's 450 horsepower Sylvia is wild. Even Sakai got in on the fun in the demo car, making it to the top 16 before losing to Nobushige Kumakubo, ironically the founder of Ebisu circuit. Eventually, the competition was cut down all the way to Katsuhiro Ueo and Ken Maeda. Ueo lived in the region and was one of the most famous 8.6 drivers in Japan, but Maeda proved just a little bit faster and cleaner and took home the trophy for the day. You can never have too much of a good thing, and D1 would return next year, showing off a new level of polish in both vehicle styling and driver skill. The series was really coming into its own. Even though it was more professional this time, the ever faster cars meant crashes were both more common and more dangerous. The gravel trap was no longer content with taking off just a bumper. In the semi-final battle, Toshiki Yoshioka got completely thrown after he dipped just a wheel into the gravel. This was a really crazy looking crash, especially from the in-car cameras, but he was completely fine. What's even crazier is that Yoshioka drove to the pits, put on a spare wheel, and then held his own against Ueo in the subsequent run, with one tire still flat and some really messed up alignment. The judges understandably gave the win to Ueo though, and he would go on to take the whole competition, moving up from his second place finish last year. Beyond just D1 GP, 2002 and 3 brought some other updates around Sekia. Alongside some new original items at the Super Factory and a new logo, the circuit was buzzing with small events. mainly clubs renting out the circuit or lower step-up series for drivers that wanted to advance their careers. One of those drivers was Yuri Rin. In 2002 and 3, she ranked top 5 in multiple magazine competitions and was starting to make a name for herself in the local scene. Alongside fellow Sekia drifter Teruaki Shimoda, nicknamed Shimochin, she started a small shop named Garage Waizu and quickly became one of the best sources for Sekia information on the internet. You can name any competition at Sekia Hills and she was probably there, either running in the women's class or documenting everything going on. After her first experiences at Sekia, she had decided that she really wanted to take this seriously, and Waizu would soon become a force in the community. Moving on to 2004, the year would unfortunately start off on the wrong foot. D1 had left Sekia. While it brought tons of people, Sekia wasn't really the right location for such a quickly growing event. You can tell that the complex was basically at capacity, and its spot on the side of a mountain meant that they weren't going to be adding spectator space anytime soon. Around the same time, a lot of the more conservative old guard tracks were opening their doors to drifting, and one of them was Autopolis, just 50 miles from Sekia. It was literally the same exact concept, a racing-focused resort, but the track was originally built for F1 and had 3 hotels on site. It was essentially a much larger, more traditional version of Sekia, and D1GP's growing size and desire for legitimacy meant that Sekia was forgotten in favor of the glitz and glamour Autopolis provided. The good news is that something much more important than a single event was going down. Kyushu was experiencing a style revolution, and Sekia was at the center of it. In 2004, the DEC shop introduced 2 new items that would come to define the next few years of Kyushu drifting. The DEC Tribal sticker and Spol 3D Wing launched to great popularity, and their demo cars all had a full refresh in order to promote the new parts. These cars would come to be the blueprint for a lot of people's builds in the region, especially Toku's Red 180SX. A Kyushu car of this era was defined by 3 characteristics: a low-down, aggressive Urus body kit, functional, motorsport-inspired wheels, usually from Worker Rays, and a livery by Flash Design Graphics, the artist behind the Sekia Tribal. The earliest we get to see cars like this is a Battle Mag Cup in 2004, where shops like Kazu Power and teams like PASS were finding their place in the community. In fact, one of PASS's members would become the first new demo car driver since the circuit opened, and a few more would be added by 2005. It's unclear whether they were officially employees like the original 3, but these new cars would be showcased on the website, out front, and in magazine ads, so it's safe to assume that they probably got at least a free membership. Out of this new generation, Mai Nakamura's Pink S15 is probably the most famous. Remember how I said Yuririn was a consistent top 5 finisher in all those competitions? The only reason she wasn't in first was because Mai always occupied that spot. She wasn't just one of the best female drifters at Sekia Hills, she was one of the best drifters, period. So it was a no-brainer to hook her up with a livery. The final addition to the team was the Hyperhero family, 2 drifting brothers that drove white and gray S15s. The older brother, Hideki Hiro Takashita, was often the butt of a lot of jokes, as he was a 39-year-old rice farmer when he first got behind the wheel. He was an incredibly fast learner though, and became a legitimate competitor by his early 40s. Alongside his skill, he was also just a really nice guy and became fast friends with almost all the people I've already mentioned, so he was another obvious pick. The mid-2000s were a period of big change, and it applied to more than just the cars and drivers. After their 5th anniversary, the team was looking to do a bigger refresh of the circuit, and they accomplished that by introducing a used car dealership and storage, giving the average person the ability to buy, build, store, and drive a drift car all in the same location. For the less average people, it also opened the door to even more extreme builds, as you were no longer required to have a tow vehicle to bring illegal cars. You could just keep them at the circuit. At this point, Sekia had fully found its purpose. While it was never the biggest, most competitive track, it was a hotspot for the coolest drivers, and was quickly becoming the place to go if you wanted to progress to the big leagues. Nothing exemplified that more than the events coming to Sekia in the next few years.
I'm wishing on a star. to get you back in my arms, sweet baby. I'm wishing on a star to fill the space between us. Ooh, oh, oh, yeah. I'm wishing on a star to get you back in my arms, sweet baby. I'm wishing on a star to fill the space between us.
By 2006, drifting's incredibly fast growth in technology and popularity meant that D1 GP cars were incredibly far removed from what the average person could build. D1 Street Legal was their attempt to return to the go-kart tracks and local shops that made D1 what it was, with restrictions on engine swaps, carbon panels, and anything else a normal person couldn't get at their local parts store. Stereo systems and air conditioning were mandatory, which was a huge departure from the incredibly functional stripped interiors of most competition cars. These huge changes really worked. D1SO created an incredibly competitive vibe that more than recaptured the magic of the early D1 GP seasons, with packed crowds, skilled drivers, and some really cool cars. Sekia was almost always home to all three of those things, and is probably the most well-developed grassroots circuit. It was the perfect place for D1SL. The organizers thought so too, and it would be the most important circuit on the calendar, holding the first and last event of the season. Round 1 kinda felt like a rehash of the early GP events. D-Friend's shop driver Hiroshima got taken out by Nomuken, and similar slip-ups from other famous drifters meant that 2 of the final 4 were relatively unknown locals. In the end, big-time pro driver Masao Sunaga took home the trophy, but even he can track his roots back to Sekia. He was a Kyushu drifter and would often judge local competitions at the circuit. Anyway, this win was a good start to his season, and coming into round 7, the final event, he was poised to win the entire 2006 championship. The only person that stood between Sunaga and the cup was Sekia local Takashi Hagasako. At round 1, Hagasako exploded onto the scene, finishing incredibly high for a relative newcomer. A true hometown hero, he was a driver for Garage Endless and local team Clearance, but his skill would soon net him some even bigger sponsors. He made his way throughout the entire season, taking top 5 finishes at almost every event, and although he only won 1 round, his incredible consistency meant that a good performance in the final battle at Sekia could bring home the season trophy. 2 masters of the circuit were going in for a high-stakes final showdown, and any slip-up would mean the other had a chance to steal the cup. The atmosphere was really intense, but tons of Sekia locals showed up to support Hagasako, including Hiro's wife, which caused a little bit of strife in the family. When the event finally got started, both drivers cut through most of the field with ease. No one even stood a chance against their near-perfect driving. Moving into the quarterfinals though, Sunaga just barely lost in an incredible battle, and the table was set for Hagasako to take it all. The only problem? Sunaga went into the event with a points advantage, and Hagasako's opponent was the multiple-time D1 GP champion Katsuhiro Ueo. After his lead run, it wasn't looking good. Ueo had pulled off a beautiful drift, staying just a few feet from his door the entire time. The pressure was really on, but Ueo felt it too. During the second run, he pushed his car too hard, spinning it right at the center of the turn, and Hagasako held his drift and maneuvered around the outside. The announcers and fans went wild, all while Sunaga's supporters sat dejected in the stands. Hagasako had already graduated to a big-time sponsorship with Urus and Blitz, but this victory would make sure that he would continue to compete for years to come. Not everyone's rise was as bombastic as Hagasako's, but this era of prolific competitions allowed 2 more big players to come out of the circuit, and we've already seen both of them before. Remember that lime green S14 that spun during the D1 section? That was Kaz Hayashida. A close friend of the people at Garage Waizu, Kaz was incredibly dedicated to drifting, and had put in years and years of practice at Sekia Hills. Even though he never did well in D1 Street Legal, high finishes in events like MSC Challenge and the Sekia Only Federal Cup put the eyes of some big drifters onto him, including the higher-ups at Signal Auto. It started in 2007 with a hood sticker and some free goodies, but pretty quickly progressed to a full neon green show-up paint job with an out-of-place sticker for Formula Drift, America's premier drift series. It wasn't long before it was revealed that he was being sent overseas to drive their most legendary car, the R34. His effort had paid off in a big, big way. The other driver that made it big was Hayashida's former teammate, Shimichin. The co-owner of Garage Waizu had been slowly progressing his drifting career for quite a while, taking advantage of the same series that Kaz participated in. Shimichin was a real OG drifter, starting when the community was incredibly small and tight-knit, and a lot of the people he drove with back in the day went on to become D1 drivers. I assumed this made him a little bit jealous, as he didn't have the resources to move up to that tier of drifting, but as Waizu got bigger, he started showing up to tons and tons of qualifying events and step-up series. Eventually, he moved on to D1 SL, and a few decent results, plus high finishes and tons of small cups, secured him his full-fat GP license later. As 2009 rolled around, the festivities were in full swing at Sekia Hills. Coming off of a climactic D1 SL event, the circuit had a packed calendar of meets and a crowd of people to attend them. One warm morning, that crowd arrived to a locked gate with a lawyer's notice. Sekia Hills was closed, effective immediately. Wait, what? Well, while Sekia had been thriving for all these years, their corporate overlords were really not doing too hot. The general opinion of the people that lived in the area was that the entire town was essentially operating with no regard for profit. And looking back on it, some of the decisions do seem a little strange. A full ski hill in a region with the climate of the American South, 2 shopping malls in a tiny farming town, even disregarding the massive multi-million-dollar complex built for an obscure and looked down upon subculture, this place just didn't make any financial sense. When American journalist Eric Salvaggio visited Sekia, he wrote that it had all the products of a rising bubble, when the novelty of defying nature was affordable to build and worth the price to tourists. Hotel Sekia seems to have been built just as defying nature lost its charm. As locals were battling it out during D1 SL, Sekia Hills' parent company was going bankrupt during the 2008 financial crisis. Eventually, they were bought out by Goldman Sachs, and by 2009, everything except for the hotel and chapel had been sold off. Hiro was particularly affected by the closure. His friends put it the best: "I have an inseparable image of Hiro in DEC." Someone else said that, at this point, you should quit farming and become a full-time circuit manager. They had no idea, but their innocent joke was actually an incredible prediction, because Sekia was going to be born again, and Hiro played a huge role in it. If we rewind back to 2007, something curious was going down on the Sekia Hills forums. Toku, the driver of the Red 180, was done. After almost a decade at the circuit, he had gotten bored and decided to quit. It really didn't last long though, as a visit to a Federal Cup event had put him back in the spirit. He had already left his job, but decided to commission a new demo livery from Flash and build his own website, which he called Garage R3. Quickly, it became a home to some of the other unofficial demo car drivers, hosting my and Hiro's blogs. Still, it was nothing more than a little homepage. That is, until Sekia closed. Obviously, all 3 of them had spent a significant portion of their life at the circuit, and with the connections they had with management, they were probably the only people that could save Sekia Hills. Very quickly, they established a new business called Braveheart and scrambled to find funding to reopen the circuit. When I was first researching them, I thought that they had made a typo on their website because their address redirected me to a small apartment building in the suburbs of Fukuoka, I just assumed that a number was off somewhere, but after looking farther into it, I realized that Braveheart was literally just the three of them. There was no big business. Their love for the circuit was so strong that they were able to buy the pricey complex. What was originally run by a global mega corporation was now being operated out of Toku's apartment. Sekia was only closed for a grand total of 2 weeks, and when it reopened, almost nothing had changed. They even kept the same motto, driving to next stage. While the name was swapped to Sekia Circuit and the DEC signs were removed, the only real change came in what events wanted to come to the circuit. Big series like D1 didn't want to touch Sekia with a 10-foot pole. The exception was the Federal Carnival, which actually thrived in the more carefree, community-focused atmosphere the Sekia Circuit had. A mid-sized event run by Chinese tire manufacturer Federal, the Carnival was an attempt to gain a foothold in the Japanese market, of course, through drifting. While the Cup was exclusive to Sekia Hills, the organizers didn't spare any expense procuring big names to judge and exhibit at the event. The same can't be said about their prizes though. You want to know what the first place finisher of this grueling competition got? You'd be right if you said 0 yen and a lot of tires. Still, the event attracted a ton of people. It had a really fun, lighthearted vibe, and anyone could show up and have their skills critiqued by the best in the game. Another event that came back extra cool was Ikaten. It had never stopped happening, but during the DEC days, you mostly saw the same teams running the event. By the time Sekia closed and reopened though, a different group of faces had arrived to breathe new life into the competition, bringing with them the next evolution of Sekia style. Much to Flash's disappointment, this new generation of Kyushu drifters mostly did away with the colorful liveries, and swapped from more standard body kits to Urus's fresh new design, the Type GT line. These cars were walking contradictions. The ground effects were almost Time Attack spec, but most of the cars ran low-profile wings or nothing at all out back. Similarly, the flashy liveries were gone, but wheels were being slathered with neon green or orange paint. Somehow, the dissonance really works. The visual impact this style holds is incredible, and it's totally unique to this little pocket of the drifting world. Even though it seems like they were doing great, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows at Sekia Hills. The first couple years of the circuit came and went successfully, but by the early 2010s, it had mostly gone dark. Because there weren't really any more huge televised events, what was going on was mostly covered by Wazoo blog posts and 240p trance edits. It was still a popular place to visit, but the recession's far-reaching effects meant that as time passed, more and more people were abandoning the pastime and selling their cars. In 2012, Toku's 180SX appeared outside the office with its livery stripped, up for sale.
And this one's actually for sale. It's a 180SX, of course, and tuned by Sekia Hills.
This was a seriously bad sign. Whispers started spreading through the community that the circuit was in trouble for the second time in just 3 years.
One interesting thing is supposedly this is the last year Sekia Hills is going to be demolished, and a solar panel farm is going to be put at the same spot. Unfortunately, those rumors turned out to be true. Management made the announcement. Sekia was closing at the end of 2012. While this was heartbreaking for a lot of drivers, it actually pulled the community a lot closer together. Events were being scheduled left and right as people wanted to get the most out of the final year. As the months passed by, drivers anxiously awaited any sort of announcement, but it never came. This was for real. By the beginning of winter, the locals were gearing up to say goodbye to Sekia for the last time, when Yuri made an announcement. Wazoo was working with the circuit to throw one final event a few days before New Year's Eve, an all-day closing party open to anyone in the area. Just a little while after the post went online, Yuri was shocked to see that hundreds and hundreds of people had signed up. They had to completely restructure the entire event because so many people were dropping by for the final chance to drift on such a legendary circuit. On the morning of December 29th, the parking lot was packed with old and new friends, reminiscing about how much time they'd spent doing this exact thing in this exact place.
drift trains 20 cars long circled the track all day, occasionally stopping for competition rounds. By the time the event was over, it was getting dark, and YZoo members had piled on the back of their carrier truck for one final ride around the track. The crowd streamed through the gates, under the "Thanks for visiting Sekia Hills" sign, and that was it. When Sekia Hills died, a lot of Kyushu culture died with it. It was a focal point where shops could advertise, clubs could meet up, and junkyards could find a lot of customers, and its closure sent everyone scrambling to figure out what to do next. Fukuoka and Kumamoto were both mid-sized cities with an incredibly disproportionate amount of tuning shops, and now, most of them have either closed or been forced to become much more traditional used car dealerships or mechanic shops. Still, the culture never fully disappeared. You can see remnants of the circuit almost anywhere you look. The local RC shop still has a replica of the track sitting out front. The new Urus demo car has a D-side sticker on the rear windshield. Perhaps the most important is that the children of these drivers are now reaching the age where they can ask what's under the tarp in the shed and get a long-winded story of the good old days. Many of these kids are now driving and maintaining their parents' cars, unknowingly keeping the circuit alive with them. The locals will always remember. To these people, Sekia Hills was a lot more than a racetrack. It was a home away from home, or a place to practice their skills, or simply somewhere to have fun with their friends. For them, Sekia Hills was paradise. After the final closure of Sekia Circuit, the Super Factory stayed open as a small mechanic shop, with the rest of the complex being covered in solar panels. The shop only lasted for a year, and it's now a chemical plant owned by a plastic bag company. You can still see the circuit under the panels, but some of it has been completely demolished. Advertising boards for Trust and Nismo still hang on the office building. Right before Sekia closed, Yuririn started an all-girls drift club named Butterfly Gals. After competing in a couple of events and making a name for themselves, Yuririn took a break from drifting because of a cancer diagnosis. She won her battle and has since gotten behind the wheel again, hosting beginner-friendly events at skid pads and supporting Shimichin's ongoing D1 career. Hiro still keeps his white S15 in the garage, as Japan's strict road laws mean it's no longer legal. He daily drives his brother's car, still complete with full aero and a Sekia Hills livery, taking it on long road trips and frequently visiting Garage YZoo. He no longer drifts, but will make an exception for events held by Yuririn and Shimichin. Everyone else is still doing fine, but most of them have quit drifting and are inactive online. I just want to make this little section to say thanks to everyone who helped with this project. It really was like a real long thing, and a lot of people helped me out during the whole process. Number one, my son, Swings, general research assistant and sanity keeper. Thank you, bro. The battle magazine scans, the ones with my and Yuririn, those are from @Moonrock on my cock on Instagram. He's chill as hell, even though the username is a little silly. The other Sekia lore master is Works9 Yuki. They know so fucking much about the circuit, maybe even a little more than I do. So they helped me a little bit. And then, of course, I emailed with Yuririn a little bit, so I'll say thank you to her as well. And last, of course, I need to say thank you to you guys for watching all the way to this point. This video kind of doesn't really matter because it's dead and it's not really coming back to life anytime soon. But this circuit is probably the coolest track that's ever existed anywhere in the world, and I love it so much with all my heart. So, yeah. Other than that, I don't really have much else. So I guess it's time to say goodbye. See ya.